Although this might be the dreaded post-lunch session, but believe me, you're in for a treat. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Mr. Michael Moore, who has graced us with his presence. He is bringing Silicon Valley education to emerging markets. To give you a brief introduction of Mr. Michael Moore, he is the CEO, Chief Investment Officer, and co-founder of GSV Asset Management. GSV is world's preeminent voice on growth investing. It offers the first publicly traded security that enables all kinds of investors to own a piece of the most dynamic VC-backed companies in the world. Its success can be highlighted by one number, $1 billion market cap. Mr. Moore has honors which include the Wall Street Journal's Best on the Street Award, and also being named Business Week's one of the best stock pickers in the country. Here to bring Silicon Valley education to emerging markets, Mr. Michael Moore.
It's a delight to be here. What a great event and a privilege to have an opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. And just, with this talk I'm going to give, I want to set some context. And before we get deep into education, I want to talk about some mega trends that are impacting all of society, all of business, because the education will sometimes, us in the education world, think we're immune from other factors. But actually, all these trends play a huge role. So let's talk about what those are. The internet, obviously a mega trend, but I think an important piece about the internet is that really we're in the internet age. And this is going to be measured not in 20 years, but in 200 years in terms of the influence, impact it has on the world. Now 3 billion people on the internet, effectively creating one global marketplace. Mobile is smartphones with over 2 billion smartphones. Putting a computer in your pocket was more powerful than put astronauts on the moon. The app economy, with 180 billion downloads last year, that is growing at a 30% plus type of clip, allowing an entrepreneur to go from idea to reaching millions and tens of millions of people in an instant. Convergence is this cross disciplines that are coming together to create very powerful solutions. Social media is an example of convergence, but again, a new medium that has allowed collaboration, communication, and powerful network effects. The rising middle class. From 2009 to 2030, the middle class around the world effectively is tripled. Sustainability, with this growth, it's no longer a question whether you grow or it's green, you got to do both. And the knowledge economy and the global marketplace, the knowledge-based economy, education makes a difference not only how an individual does, but how a company does, and for that matter, how well a country does. But if you look at the money spent for education, there's no correlation between money spent and educational outcomes, but there is a direct correlation between broadband connectivity and educational results. And globalization, obviously the focus of this event is emerging markets and this global economy that we're working in, and how that impacts education entrepreneurs, educators, and learners around the world. But looking at the shift that's going on in Dubai, there's no more of a better example of a truly global city. But in the 1990s, 25 years ago, the United States was 50% of the global capital markets. It was 40% of global GDP, and the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies in the U.S. market, only got 10% of their earnings outside of the United States. Today, obviously, every one of those metrics has shifted dramatically, and with the United States being only 4% of the world population and this growing middle class, you're going to see these numbers continue to shift in very dramatic fashion. From an entrepreneur's point of view, what I think is the most fascinating reality of the world that we're in is it used to be an entrepreneur had an idea, they brought it to the local market, if it was successful, they bring it to a regional market, and then maybe if they're really successful, they go national, and very few would actually have an opportunity to go global. An entrepreneur today is starting with a global perspective. in many respects. And that's a really huge shift, and I think it has profound implications. Looking at the global businesses, just to make some obvious points, in the healthcare industry, Pfizer's in 90 countries, 190 billion market cap. Starbucks in 67 countries, 22,000 stores, $87 billion market cap. Ford, 63 countries, $49 billion market cap. Amazon, 191 countries, $261 billion market cap. Google, 190 countries plus, 1.2 trillion searches per year, nearly a $500 billion market cap. How about education? Well, education, if you look at it, the great brands in education, mainly today still are local or national brands. And while that has been the historical norm, I think that's radically changing before our eyes. As an analogy to think about where we're going, I think it's often helpful to look at what's happened in the past from other examples. And so we like to look at this healthcare versus education framework, just because I think it does provide a lens to a playbook that can play out for the future of this industry. So if you look at healthcare in 1970, it was a large industry, even then it was 8% of GDP. People asked the question, not only could you make money, but should you make money? It was really a cottage industry, wildly fragmented. There was very few large healthcare companies. In fact, there was just 4 with $1 billion greater market value. And from a technology standpoint, not very sophisticated, and less than 2% of capital markets. You fast forward to the clock to today, healthcare is 18% of US GDP. Large, consolidating players in the marketplace, global players. Technology is ubiquitous. And from a capital markets perspective, 18% of GDP, but nearly the same parity in terms of capital market representation. And there's 400 healthcare companies with $1 billion greater market value today. If you look at education market in the US today, it's second largest in healthcare, 8% of GDP, exactly the percentage that healthcare was in 1970. And it's the cottage industry. People ask the question not only can you make money, but should you make money? From a technology standpoint, while rapidly changing and improving compared to other sectors, financial services, healthcare, go on and on. It's not as technology intensive as other sectors. And from a capital markets perspective, while 8% of GDP, just 0.4% of capital markets. So what inspires us, and my partner Deborah of 20 years is in the back of the room, I like to say she's the one that thinks I speak. But what we've been looking at as our focus for what this is all about is we believe that everybody in the world should have equal opportunity to participate in the future. And what does that mean? The foundation of that aspiration is education. That is the foundation for how people are going to be able to participate or not. Yet if you look around the world, and by the way, the United States has many, many challenges. Fewer and fewer people have the education knowledge they need to be successful on a go-forward basis. So let's look at some success stories. Singapore, which only became an independent country in 1965, at that time, it had a GDP per capita, same GDP per capita as Jamaica, with 1/4 that of the United States. You look at today, Singapore has exceeded the United States on a GDP per capita basis. And what that was really done by was investment in education and human capital in a magnificent, significant manner. Another positive story. You look at the Indian private market, private school market, has doubled from 2007 to 2012. That's the good news. Bad news, if you look at what's taking place, there'll be 40 million more college uneducated adults in India in 2020 than there is today. That's just a function of a young demographic in that market. You literally can't build schools fast enough to educate the students. You look at basic education proficiency in the developed world versus the undeveloped world. Obviously, if you don't have math skills, if you can't read, you are not going to participate in the future. And looking at even just the time that students stay in schools, we still have, while it's increased in developing regions, it still is half of what it is in developed countries. And if you're not in school, you're obviously, it's tough to learn, particularly if you can't read and you don't have math skills. So they say there's a 100-year gap to close. In sub-Saharan Africa, the goal is to have 100% lower school completion, which would be done in 2111, which is nearly 100 years from now. So the point is, we can't wait 100 years, and how are we going to accelerate that? 50 years ago, Gordon Moore had this thesis. He said that computing power was going to double every couple of years. And what's interesting about Moore's law, it wasn't a physical or scientific law. Basically, it was a hypothesis that he conjectured on the technology industry. And effectively, that imparted his will on an industry not only transformed the technology industry, but it transformed all society. Because effectively, computing power has doubled every 2 years for the last 50 years. The cost of computing has gone almost free. The cost of storage is infinite and free. If the automobile industry had the same kind of progress, we're basically at Ford Taurus that cost $20,000 in 1990 would it cost $1 today, and you'd throw it away after you used it. Looking at how Moore's law impacted everything. So 20 years ago, Netscape commercialized the internet. Google in 1998 was hatched in a garage, effectively making all the world's information at your fingertips for free. Salesforce launched in 1999, continues to improve software as a service, revolutionizing the software industry. Facebook created a communication and collaboration platform for the world. The iPhone, which by itself was a revolutionary device, but effectively the platform and the app economy that followed allowed the peer-to-peer economy grow, with Airbnb wildly successful, Uber obviously transforming the transportation industry. All that made possible by the iPhone. So when we talk about bringing Silicon Valley to the education industry, I think it is important to think about what Silicon Valley is all about. I mean, Silicon Valley is not because it's about chips or about software or hardware. What makes Silicon Valley magic is it's all about the power of the idea and the power of the entrepreneur and how that's imposed on a sector. So energy is a big issue, big problem. All of a sudden, Silicon Valley over the last 10 years has become a major force in innovation and green technology. Healthcare, once again, there was no embedded expertise, but basically took that mindset and said, okay, what are the solutions that we can develop? And companies like 23andMe and Genentech and Gilead have been formed there. Again, the auto industry example, General Motors spent $7.2 billion in research and development. For that, their electronic car that they've created, you can drive it 35 miles before you have to recharge it. Tesla, you can drive 265 miles in the same charge. Basically, a person who had no automobile experience said, what are we going to do? Create a Silicon Valley solution. So automobile innovation has basically been on this linear innovation curve for some time, and then Tesla comes in and basically changed that. Basically went on the Moore's Law, Silicon Valley, disruptive technology curve. So Tesla's market cap, more than half of General Motors, despite the fact that it has 1/50 of the revenues. Uber, Lyft, again, benefited from that disruptive mindset. And now, of course, Google launching their self-driving cars that we'll see on the road sometime in the next 2 years to 3 years if they get laws passed. So, to me, what's really super inspiring about what's going on in education today is something that's actually broader going on. GSV, the name, stands for Global Silicon Valley. And so what we see is this magic of entrepreneurism and innovation that's made Silicon Valley, between San Francisco and San Jose, such an amazing place, has gone global and it's gone viral. So what I like to say is this has gone from Austin to Boston, from Chicago to Sao Paulo, to Mumbai, to Shanghai, to Dubai. Give me a clap for that. So that's what we call the Global Silicon Valley. And that is the environment that the entrepreneurs in education get to play into. And that Global Silicon Valley all fits within what I call this nation of imagination. because that's really the power of creating these solutions that are both disruptive and create scale. So Facebook was founded in 2004. If you're just thinking differently, effectively it's created a virtual country of its own with 1.5 billion, now 1.6 billion citizens, making it the largest country in the world. I mean, it has its own currency, it has its own language, it has its own norms of government. I mean, it's just a different way to think things. Kerry Limousine, here's what's ironic. Kerry Limousine, by the way, I was a research analyst following Kerry Limousine 20 years ago. Kerry had a brand, it had a global brand for limousine service, but it didn't own any cars. It owned no cars. It had an 800 number, it had a brand. Does that sound familiar? Well, Uber didn't even have a brand, but they created one. In 2009, they launched themselves. Today it has a $62 billion market value, and nobody ever even thinks about Kerry Limousine anymore. This is St. Peter's Square in 2005. Just take a look. That's what it looked like. Here's what it looks like in 2013. So basically, in that period of time, right, everybody has become a photographer, right? In that same time period, Kodak, which was founded in 1888, and by the way, invented the digital camera, in 2011 went bankrupt. That same year, Snapchat was founded, and now Snapchat's worth $15 billion. Again, just looking at what's going on, thinking about it creatively, imaginatively, incredible. Education innovation, historically, has been on this linear curve. What we see going on now is it's on the exponential curve. And entrepreneurs are filling that gap, leveraging the opportunity the digital tracks have been laid over the last 20 years with 3 billion people on the internet and 2 billion smartphones, and really coming up with powerful new scale ideas. Investors get it. What's happened in the last 5 years in terms of education investing, going back to that, what we think can happen from healthcare to education. Venture capital investors have seen this opportunity. I mean, capital is pretty smart. It follows where opportunity is. So you see the increase in investment in education grow by nearly 41% over the past 5 years, reaching over $2 billion last year. And importantly, the investors that are investing in the education category now are the benchmarks and Kleiner Perkins and Sequoias, the ones that are always early and a lot of time right. So I think it's a tremendous indicator that something very special is going on in this category. So what we see now happening, the reason why those investors are excited to be investing in this space is because you're now seeing these companies that can go from idea to reaching many people fast. It's what I call weapons of mass instruction. And you've got a number of examples of these type of companies. So Course Hero, which was started in a Cornell student's dorm room about 5 years ago, it's now got 5 million members in 120 countries, note sharing. Khan Academy, 540 million lessons completed, courses offered in 36 languages. Again, you hear the kind of global common denominator which is going on again. These companies are very young. They're already reaching many places all over the world. Clever, 20 million users. Chegg, 50% of all college students in the U.S. on the Chegg network. 75% of college-bound seniors, reaches 160 countries today. Edmodo, 63 million members, 16 million members outside the United States. 2U, 200,000 hours of live sessions, 72 countries worldwide. Coursera, not even 5 years old, 17 million users, 1,800 courses from 138 institutions, 57% of its revenue comes from outside the United States, 70% of students are outside the United States. So, we talked about global megatrends that impact all industries. Now I'm going to close talking about specific megatrends that are impacting the education sector. And we wrote a white paper late last fall called 2020 Vision. And the idea with this was to say, going back to our original issue or question, our goal, that everybody in the world has an opportunity to participate in the future, the foundation of that being education. So if that's the goal, what we wrote this paper was saying is, okay, we achieved that goal. By 2020, we achieved that goal. I admit that probably is a little bit aggressive, but we said that's the target. So what we did is say that's the target, let's put the movie, so we achieved it, then we put the movie in reverse and showed how we got there. And that's the 2020 Vision white paper. We brought some copies somewhere in the back, but you can download it for free off gsv.com website. Talking about these trends that we outlined in the book, I really do believe these are what influence the biggest opportunities. The first one I'll talk about is Kaizen. And so Kaizen is the Japanese term that means continuous improvement. And I'm well aware after last night that I didn't come up with this term first. My friends at Kaizen said that I have to pay a royalty now every time I mention the word Kaizen. That's okay. But so what Kaizen EDU is this idea that you're going to need continuous learning to participate in the future. You're no longer going to fill up your knowledge tank to age 25 and drive off through life. You're going to continually need to replenish the knowledge and learn new things. So the old system was basically you played from 0 to 5 and learned from 5 to 25. You got a job from 25 to 65 and then you retired. When you retired, you got a gold watch from the company that you worked for 40 years. For the new system, it's about you're going to learn from the beginning to the end. I say from womb to tomb. You're going to do all the other things along the way, but it's going to be a continuous learning thing for your whole entire life. It's projected that millennials graduating from college today will have 15 careers by the time they graduate from college and when they retire, if they ever retire. This is from the Department of Labor of the United States. Interestingly, with millennials, the number one say that they're looking for from an employer is educational experience, training, development is the number one thing that they say they're looking for. And so you kind of look at that contrast for an employer, you say, okay, one, get the best people, they want to learn things, but they're going to change jobs 15 times, so am I going to really invest in them? Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, came up with a very good book called The Alliance, and what it really talks about is creating this, effectively says tours with young professionals, that they're going to do certain things, and one of the quid pro quos was that you're going to provide education and learning opportunities because that's what they want, but they're going to provide excellent production with the employer. So it's this alliance, this kind of new relationship. Companies like General Assembly have basically looked at this reality of ongoing needs for learning and how you're going to be relevant in the future. And they created a curriculum all around new skills. As they used to say was they're an Ivy League, they're a technical school for the Ivy League. Effectively giving people coding skills and user interface design skills, and been highly effective. And so the biggest statistic that I think that this speaks volumes about what the value proposition is, 99% of their graduates get placed in a job that they're looking for. Another wave that's reality, I think a lot of people recognize the best job that they can get is the one they create for themselves. So you're seeing this explosion of incubators and accelerators. This is the United States map, it's around the world. 5 years ago, that wasn't true. Today, it's absolutely booming. We actually have an incubator in Silicon Valley called GSV Labs. We've got 170 companies incubating. There are 60 are in the ed tech space. Another key trend in the education industry is what I call knowledge as a currency. And what this means is basically it's about what you know, not where you go. It's about knowledge, not college. And so in the old world, it was all about having a degree, and the more prestigious the institution that you had the degree from, the more the opportunity was created for you. And while the degree is going to continue to be important, it's going to be augmented by demonstrating and representing other things that you know. Big data, by the way, is going to help that in a significant way. And so being able to take classes, in your pajamas, on the subway, being able to get internships, other ways that you're going to create your own knowledge portfolio. And that knowledge portfolio is going to be something you keep with you for your entire life that is going to present you with the opportunity. So what are the kind of key skills that you need to know in this new world? What is the future of education and critical thinking, entrepreneurship, quantitative reasoning, professional development? But underlying all that is you need to know how to learn. So learning how to learn is going to be the key thing that people bring, and it's going to be complemented by this knowledge as a currency phenomenon. Another mega trend that we see going on in the education area is what I call Hollywood meets Harvard. And so Hollywood has been really good at getting people to want to consume its product. They create engagement, they create storytelling, they know how to get people to want to participate and immerse. You can't learn anything if you're not paying attention. And so thinking about not only is how you create engagement and how you create educational courses, but also how do you create different kind of models that reach a scale need around the world. And so it's about how you create greater access, it's how you create lower cost, how do you create more consistency with the production. If you think about these small little colleges all have their own kind of production units, consistency, cost, everything just doesn't make any sense. I think that can be a lot of lessons to learn from Hollywood or the media business for that. And the other component I like to say is this continuum that's being created between news and knowledge. So I think no longer is there these different segments. I think you see this continuum of how people get the information that they need, that is knowledge, that's insight, that lets them be productive. And so I think the mega winners are going to be the companies that create great education efficacy, but have great entertainment value. In other words, people they consume it, and it's something they want to do. The fourth mega trend is big data, and this is a huge catalyst for the education industry and a lot of these new models. It's the powerful software that you see powering Netflix and Spotify and Amazon. It gets a much more personalized experience, combined with being able to prescribe and have real-time diagnosis, what's going on, what you know, what you don't know, what's the right way to get you to your goals. And so looking at that, I think the future world is about effectively thinking about this robot tutor in the cloud, that every student has their own personal tutor with every single click, basically getting more individualized experience. I'm going to show you a quick clip, just because I think it, I don't know who saw the movie Big Hero 6? Okay, so you remember Baymax, the personal healthcare robot? Okay, here's just a little clip. Here's Hero, who's the prodigy quoter, and his personal healthcare guy Baymax.
So, what have you been working on?
I'll show you.
Duct tape? Hate to break it to you, bro. Already been invented. Hey. Stop! Dude! Ow!
This is what I've been working on.
Hello, I am Baymax, your personal healthcare companion. I was alerted to the need for medical attention when you said, I'm a robotic nurse. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain? Physical or emotional? I will scan you now. Scan complete. You have a slight epidermal abrasion on your forearm. I suggest an antibacterial spray.
Oh, what's in this spray specifically?
The primary ingredient is bacitracin.
It's a bummer. I'm actually allergic to that.
You are not allergic to bacitracin. You do have a mild allergy to peanuts.
Not bad. You've done some serious coding on this thing, huh?
Programming with over 10,000 medical procedures. This chip is what makes Baymax Baymax.
Final?
Yeah, going for a non-threatening, huggable kind of thing.
Looks like a walking marshmallow. Oh, that's
I am a robot. I cannot be offended.
hyperspectral canvas?
Yep.
Huh. Titanium skeleton.
Carbon fiber.
Right. Lighter. You're an actor. Where did you get those?
Machine right here.
Really?
Yep. You can lift 1,000 pounds.
Shut up. You have been a good boy. Have a lollipop. I cannot deactivate until you say you are satisfied with your care.
Well then, I'm satisfied with my care.
He's gonna help a lot of people.
Hey, what kind of battery does it use?
Lithium ion.
You know, secret capacitors will charge way fast.
Burning in midnight oil, Mr. Hamada?
Okay. So Newton is creating basically your own personal education robot. And what they've done is taken a lot of the world's content and Newtonized it. Able to put 9 million users today, 15 billion recommendations they give today, getting smarter with every recommendation, with every click. Greenbox Learning, teaching kids how to play math by playing games, every click again becoming more individualized for that student. Mobile obviously is going to be a huge trend in learning, people learning off their phone, on the move, all the things that we talked about before. It's a very mobile society, students are very mobile. Remind is an example of a mobile communication business in the education field. In 3 years, 35 million users, parents, students, and teachers. Class Dojo, 50 million students, teachers, and parents basically being able to communicate what's going on with the individual child. And the last mega trend I'll talk about is brain science. And what's super exciting to us is how this is really the last frontier, or the next frontier in science, and the progress that's being made here is extraordinary. If you look what happened in the Human Genome Project, it started in 1990. 13 years later, it was completed, cost nearly $4 billion. And in 2003, when it was completed, to get your own personal genome, it cost $100 million a piece. Today, it costs you $100 to get your own personal human genome down. If you look at the same type of emphasis on what the discoveries that go in the brain, the ability to create individualized learning, being able to how people best learn, being able to retrain the brain, having people with learning disabilities, all this, I believe, over the next 5-10 years is going to go through revolutionary type of change and progress. And so the last piece, this is maybe from an investor's point of view, and I'm sorry, modestly I call it Mo's Law. But what we look for, we think the companies in education that are going to have the most financial success are the ones that actually have the greatest academic or educational impact. And so what we say is that return on education, or ROE, ultimately is going to transform into IRR. And we think those are those scale impact companies that really truly deliver significant education and therefore opportunities to the tens of millions and billions of students around the world that need it. So those are my comments. I think if there's any more time, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm over here.
Hi.
Excellent work. I think I really like the reference to Newton and how big data is a pretty big thing in education. My question then becomes more for, even as we look at the trends and the information in big data, emerging markets have a lot of data that's different from what is happening in the region in the US market, which is rather obvious even as you look at the needs and requirements of education sectors there. Speaking from an education startup background, what happens with the education companies that are coming out of emerging markets that have got data that is not necessarily interesting? I don't know about this. It's not necessarily interesting to a US market. What is the value proposition with data coming out of Africa and Asia, specifically for this summit? And then the second question becomes, what are you seeing in terms of that gap of depth we're talking about, where between 250 and $2.5 million, most investors don't put money in that gap. It's either pre, which is very early stage, or post, which is Series A, $10 million, $5 million investments. What are you seeing as a trend in their education?
Sure. First, as it relates to big data and why I think it's such a big deal in education, is not only how I think it's going to be able to transform a learning experience and have a more individualized experience, and that's happening today, and it's only, you can just think what it's going to be in 10 years. It's going to be just incredible. But what's even more compelling about big data is historically in the education sector, it was kind of like the healthcare sector, in that people said, okay, somebody had this breakthrough education idea, a breakthrough education software technology product, and what's the natural reaction from a school or a parent or anybody, a teacher? To say, go experiment on somebody else's kids, right? Let's prove it out over the next 10, 15 years and then come back. And you had ideas that basically died on the vine because they couldn't prove that they were actually effective. And by the way, if a company's not effective at educating kids, they should go away. But if they are, they should be able to reach out to people. So one of the things that real-time, powerful analytics, and big data is sort of I think a misused word sometimes, but these powerful software analytics that are able to demonstrate what's going on and show what kind of efficacy a product or class or college has. That's a big deal. That's a game changer for an entrepreneur in the education sector. As it relates to funding and different kind of funding gaps, I do everywhere people complain about different funding gaps, and I think there is a reality. I'm lucky to live in Silicon Valley, where there's this robust ecosystem and different kind of sources of money that basically go from startup idea way through. Now again, I think it's true everywhere though, that companies die because they don't have traction. And that's sort of a natural, evolution that I think is actually relatively healthy. I appreciate it's more difficult maybe in other markets, but I also, investors are very hungry for ideas. And so I do think maybe in the old days, a lot of investors basically tried to be very local in terms of where they allocated money. I think more and more investors are trying to find smart ways to identify great entrepreneurs, great ideas, solving big needs wherever they are. We're seeing the activity in places all over the world. I think it's just the different conversations we've had in the last few days with people in Dubai, in terms of the money that's being invested in the Philippines and in Africa and in Indonesia. The capital is trying to find great ideas. And so I know it's frustrating sometimes, but I do think things are getting better every day for promising ideas.
Hi, Jared Holton from New York City. So I gave the keynote last night, and many of the same themes, and I'm a big believer in the power of technology to change
I
education.
appreciate being able to borrow your themes from last night because it's possible.
So let's do a little test, which is that we both are optimists and hope this will all happen. What do you think potentially derails this future you described? Because if we can anticipate that, we maybe can head off this derailment and ensure their success.
I think some of the derailment is that things don't happen as fast as people expect them to. Taking too long can be the same as being wrong sometimes. And even if the idea ultimately is right, it can be wrong. I think one of the key things for success is that your product, your solution, your school works. Being able to show, relentless focus on outcomes that people are successful for experiencing the product service, is the critical thing. I also think along the way, making sure, I think that ultimately the proof is in the pudding, or the proof is in the outcomes, but understanding how happy the different constituents are, with the product or service. And so I think net promoter scores might be overused. I'm so tired of saying, well, I would recommend something on 1 to 10 and knowing how the whole game works. But still, some type of way to understand, is the student happy, is the teacher happy, is the parent happy? Because I think that gives you constant feedback that allows you to make adjustments to be effective. But I think the biggest issue is, look, you can have something that's super exciting, but it doesn't work. So people actually don't learn better. It can be free. Coursera, for 99% of the people who take a Coursera class, it's free. But you're still spending your time, and you still have alternatives. So if you're not getting something for that, you're going to be disappointed. So I think showing, demonstrating outcomes.
Hello, so this is Rohan. I run a tech startup in Singapore. My question is, as much it is possible for like an Uber or Snapchat or Facebook to start from Silicon Valley and expand globally, would it be possible for an ad tech company to do that starting from Silicon Valley? Because people learn differently in different countries. The goal of education in emerging countries is very different from Western countries. So do you see, again, an ad tech company starting from Silicon Valley and kind of growing globally, or would there be different emerging companies in different regions and kind of dominating those regions?
Yeah, I completely appreciate that every market has its own unique aspects to it and its own kind of flavors that people are looking for. But I know, as a general idea, that people around the world have similar wants and needs, and the key is, can you deliver something that helps with the need? There's no, as we said, there's no bigger need in the world for most people than to have a way that they have the knowledge, the education, the skills, the experience, so they can continue to have a productive life in the world we live in. I mean, you look at, McKinsey just came out with a study saying that 75 million jobs were going to be taken out of the economy globally in the next 5 years from technology. So, I mean, people, what's going to happen, with these people? So, I appreciate Singapore has unique aspects to it, and I know that Brazil has unique aspects to it, but for that matter, San Francisco has different needs than, Jackson, Mississippi, or whatever. But the basic needs are the same. And I think the basic, by the way, what's created these weapons of mass destruction, as I like to call them, is leveraging fundamentals like this. I mean, smartphones, I think in Singapore, it's like 1.5 smartphones for a person, right? I mean, there's smartphones in Singapore, I know that. People are on the internet in Singapore. People people can get apps in Singapore. People want to learn in Singapore. And I think you're going to see all sorts of creative models that, and what's cool is you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to have a big disruptive idea that could be wildly successful.